Customer service, done right, can be your company's single biggest competitive advantage. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution. Join customer service authority and best-selling author John DiJulius as he interviews leaders who are revolutionizing their industries. This is more than a podcast, though. It's a movement. The Customer Service Revolution is a radical overthrow of conventional business mentality designed to transform what customers and employees experience. If you are a revolutionary customer service leader who's ready to stop competing on price and obsessed with building a brand that people cannot live without, this podcast is for you.
Every day, businesses seek to make a profit, but sometimes the bottom line is not the best indicator of a company's long-term health. In the wake of the Great Resignation, companies are scrambling to retain employees and profits, and it turns out that one answer is the key to both. The Employee Experience Revolution, the newest book by John DiJulius and Dave Murray, divulges the little-known secret of how to become a more profitable company in both the long and short term. Happy employees. Your customers will never be any happier than your employees. Remember, your people create and deliver the experience that keeps your customers coming back. Read the Employee Experience Revolution and discover how you can build the type of company that helps employees be proud of the work they do and allows them to have an opportunity to live their best lives. Order your copy today at thedijuliusgroup.com.
Welcome, revolutionaries, to another episode of the Customer Service Revolution podcast. I am John DiJulius, Chief Revolution Officer of the DiJulius Group. On today's episode, I speak with the DiJulius Group's Vice President of Consulting, Mr. Dave Murray, and we discuss how to build a world-class internal experience, how organizations can tear down silos by building collaboration within and across departments. Before we get to our interview, let's talk about what's happening in customer experience. Greedflation continues. By now, you've all heard of the term shrinkflation, a strategy which is a form of retail camouflage in which consumers pay more for growing range of products without realizing it. By shrinking typical item sizes and net weights, companies and businesses aim to cover rising labor and material costs without increasing the prices of their products while hoping consumers' spending will remain at the same level. This cagey method of value adjustment is particularly reflected in food prices. You may not notice if a bag of chips has 5 fewer chips or if your roll of toilet paper contains fewer sheets. Manufacturers don't think consumers will realize these seemingly small adjustments. For example, Gatorade reduced their bottle size from 32 to 28 ounces while charging the same price, about a 14% price increase. Well, there's a new strategy called trickflation. Similar but different. Trickflation is a strategy of changing a product's packaging to make it look larger and raise its prices. However, the product size has not increased, thus tricking the consumer. A Reddit user posted a photo of 2 different Coca-Cola cans, which is sadly a perfect example of trickflation. The can is significantly taller yet thinner and is priced at $2.37 versus the traditional can, which is $1.06. Both are 12 ounces. We'll be right back with our interview with Dave Murray.
Hi, this is Denise Thompson, Managing Partner of the DiJulius Group. We know it can be difficult getting the whole team as excited as you are about customer experience. You talk to them, write newsletters, and it seems to go in one ear and out the other. Sometimes it's the message, sometimes it's the messenger, sometimes it's just a tough crowd. Consider bringing John in to speak live at your next company or association event. He'll have them laughing, crying, cheering, and most importantly, understanding how to become world-class.
Visit johndijulius.com for details or to book your date now.
Welcome, revolutionaries, to today's webinar, Tearing Down Silos by Building Collaboration Within Teams and Across Departments. Coming from our newest book that hit #1 bestseller, The Employee Experience Revolution, and our definition for that is great companies help people live extraordinary lives. Their leaders inspire employees to build lives of meaning and purpose. So bringing in Mr. Murray, you want to tell us a little bit about today?
Absolutely, John. Great to see you. Today we're talking about chapter 7 in the book. As you mentioned already, tearing down those silos and building collaboration. I love this chapter because this one came really directly from our clients. We were out there in the 2013, 14, and 15, and working with our client base and helping them focus on their customer experience. We really started to hear how many issues were taking place between departments. And we were already focused on building that internal culture and building leadership, but our clients really started to tell us that they were having issues where they were dropping the ball, or those silos were up and kind of throwing each other under the bus and those sorts of things. So, and this evolved over the last probably 8 or 9 years to where it is today. And it's one of our most requested workshops because everyone could really use this.
Yeah. And can you give me us an example of, silos or throwing each other under the bus that people can relate to?
So I have a great example. If you go to the next slide, John, I was working with Intermountain Healthcare. They're based in Salt Lake City, Utah. I was working with their Nevada offices. And so their model is they're in healthcare. They are a hospital system, but in Nevada, they're primary clinics where you would go see your primary care. And then they also have a large headquarters that has a contact center where you call in to make an appointment, change an appointment, cancel an appointment, whatever that is. And so here's a prime example of those silos. They had about 40 clinics throughout Nevada that were seeing patients, and they had this one contact center. So a patient would call in and make an appointment, and they would slot you in wherever they could. They really didn't know the people in the clinics. They didn't know. Maybe they would email with them every once in a while. So we got teams together in Las Vegas to focus on world-class internal culture, to really kind of tear down those silos like we're talking about today. And while we're going through the workshop, some were for the contact center, some were from clinics. As we were going through that conversation, a person from the contact center actually raised his hand and said, "It's going to be so much harder to throw you guys under the bus now that I actually know you." But that happens in so many organizations where I don't know my team member, even though we're on the same team and we're working together to drive the customer experience. I've never met you. You're in a different part of the building, a different location.
And I don't know what you're doing all day. Yeah. And I've asked you for stuff. And, you're probably, on TikTok or, social media. Why aren't you getting me this stuff? And little do I know that you have 10 other people asking you for stuff and more higher priorities than my simple request.
And so a really easy way to start that fix is to just make sure that those departments are working together and talking with one another. I'll give you another great example. Unishippers, the client that we're working with right now, they have their Albany, New York-based support center, and they have sales offices across the country. They've started actually having...
And Unishippers does what?
They are an organization that is a representative of UPS, but also over-the-road freight. So They do long haul freight and UPS deliveries. They're basically a logistic company for hire. So if you sell merchandise, you call them and they handle all the logistics for you. There's support centers in Albany, and there's a lot of he said, she said, back and forth. You guys should do this. And so one thing that they started to do was to have monthly meetings where they just get together on Zoom or on Teams and just have conversation, kind of have lunch together. But even though some of them are in Phoenix and some are in Florida and some are in Boston, just kind of have lunch together with that team and just chat and talk about what's going on. So it starts to remove those silos. There's more to it than that we'll get into, but that's a nice way to start. Just making sure that your team members know each other and know what each other has to do, what those responsibilities are.
Love it.
So here's how we define world-class internal culture, which is a big piece of the Tearing Down Silo workshop and this chapter. And so what we define it as create an internal experience between team members and departments that is world-class, improve communication within departments. We'll talk a lot about that today. Locations and other teams, identify all customer segments, remembering that a lot of times some of your team members have internal customers. Are they still seeing them as customers even though they're internal? A lot of times that becomes a roadblock. And define how the work they do impacts the external customer's experience. A lot of times from that internal person, they don't see that far down the road. They don't realize the impact that they actually have. And then remove silos that we already talked about and build more compassion and empathy internally. So that's what world-class internal culture is all about.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Dave. The previous chapters in the employee experience revolution really was more vertical, top-down leadership to team members. And I believe this chapter, which you pretty much wrote the entire chapter, is horizontal. It's team member to team member within a department, and it's teams, departments to departments. So am I correct in saying that's more horizontal in a business model?
Yes, you're 100% correct, John. And it's making sure that we have those same standards in place on how we're operating internally as we put out there and how we operate externally. So it follows the same formula, but it's designed to make sure that we have a consistent experience internally as well.
Well, good.
So here are the objectives. So when we're doing this as a workshop with a client of ours, or what we're talking about in this chapter number 7, here are the objectives that we're trying to reach when we go through this process. First, to really have that interdepartmental teamwork. We've talked about that a lot already. It starts with compassion and empathy, knowing what the other team member is going through, what their burdens are, what their stressors are, that they're not just there for you on auto dial and ready to take your call at every moment. A lot of times that happens. Clarify handoffs between departments. One of the things that we see that happens so often in business today is that our assumptions are made. So if we don't actually spell out who owns what in the process, a lot of times an assumption might get made by the service team that, oh, sales covers that, and vice versa. Sales says, oh, that's for service. And then what happens? No one does it, right? Because no one owns it. So it's an opportunity to really clarify who owns what, especially when a customer is being handed off from one department to another, which happens so often in organizations today. And then understanding how your work impacts others. Again, this really is, it's for everybody in your organization, but really speaks to those that are considered more behind the scenes, because they may not realize that if they're slow to respond, or if they don't make your priority a priority for them, that the customer may suffer. So it's really making sure that all your team members understand the impact that they have. And right along with that is understanding who your internal customers are, right? So if you are especially behind the scenes, you probably have some very important customers that are internal that then have a huge impact on that external customer. So making sure you understand who those internal customers are. We'll talk a lot today about improving communication. That is usually a big jumpstart to this process, is creating some communication standards and rolling those out and making sure that they're in place, because it helps solve a lot of the issues that we'll be talking about today. And then also creating a day in the life of a colleague. So again, getting back to that compassion and empathy so that all of your team members understand what others are going through. And, it's kind of that grass is always greener mentality that we have, right? That if I'm in sales, we're working so hard and service just has their feet up waiting for the next phone call. Well, that's not always reality. So it really helps to paint that picture of what we're all working through to do our jobs to provide the best experience for our customers.
And to go back to number 2, we're clarifying handoffs between departments, as I always like to say, the experience is won and lost in the transitions. And you can take that 2 ways. You can take that, what we've been talking about in the earlier chapters, earlier webinars, is when you're interviewing for a job and you take the job, you're basically buying the interviewer, right? And you love what I tell you could do, and we connect, and I tell you could be the next vice president and this and this. And then all of a sudden that interviewer goes away and you show up on Monday to a supervisor that doesn't even know you were coming in today. And, or to, take it to sales, sells the job to the client or the potential client. And then sales goes away. And now the consultant or operations or field starts, and they really bought the salesperson and that connection. And then, you'll get it. And the client will say, all right, so Claudia said, you're going to do this. And you're like, oh, no, I think you misunderstood what we do here. And all of a sudden the client starts, oh, I got, she was just promising me anything to get me to sign. And so that's why those handoffs are so important. And hopefully neither person was not doing what they think. It's just the communication and the handoffs have to be clear. So what's really interesting, if you have any history with the DiJulius group and our work for the past 15, 20 years, almost every client we've ever worked with has created a day in the life of a customer, and it's usually external. I would say, Dave, or I'll ask you, what do you think that percentage now of our clients that not only do the day in the life of an external customer, but now do a day in the life of the coworker team member? It's getting up there.
It definitely is getting up there. It's over half, right? Because they know what a fantastic training tool it is, how important it is. And with today's technology too, it's not all that an expensive add-on to create and have that tool that you can use, have at your disposal. So a lot are doing that.
So I think we're going to show one from the DiJulius group, a day in the life of each other. This is really not to be, seen by the customer. It's for us inside the company who in a world of remote and travel and not being in offices like we used to, don't comprehend what a coworker or someone in another department, what's on their plate personally and professionally. So let's watch. That's powerful. Yes. It just made me think of so many things. Like I was thinking about in our other business, the John Roberts Spa, we're always screaming to the HR person, Mia, that we need employees. We're growing. We need employees. Get us employees. Mm-hmm. And then, when she gets us employees, we're like, why would you hire this one? Like, what are you doing? Just like, hiring anyone? And, she just gets hit from all ends. Or, me and you could be like, when we're working with a client, oh, Lindsay can get you the handouts, the workbook, the, whatever. And, she'll get that by today. Not knowing that Lindsay is redoing the website and, has a million other commitments, but we could be promising for, what other team members will get them. And, we don't know, because we don't do Lindsay's job and we don't realize how much is on her plate and how many people are pulling at her.
Right. Or maybe we weren't paying close enough attention and she's off today. Right. And we're making promises.
Yeah. Dave, so I know negative cues. Well, how does negative cues fit into internal?
So it's interesting. Negative cues exist everywhere. So if you have worked with us in the past, you know that we focus on negative cues for the external customer experience because there are so many of them, and it's such a great exercise to go through and to continue to go through because there are always more. It's one of those things where there's not a finish line. You're like, okay, we're done with those. What next? They always creep back in. A lot of times they exist in poor habits that maybe creep back in and those sorts of things. So negative cues exist everywhere. A lot of times they can be verbal. So here's an example. This is the nice example. We just need to confirm your information, as opposed to what we very often hear is you need to verify your information, right? So as opposed to you need to verify your information, if we switch that, if we tweak just two words and say, we just need to confirm your information, we've taken a statement that started out as a little bit accusatory, and now I'm advocating for you. Right? I'm trying to help you. It didn't change the meaning of the statement at all. It just changed the tone and how it comes across. And so we're not advocating that you have to go and script every conversation your team members are going to have. But awareness of what those negative cues are can be really, really helpful. So here are some internal examples that we see all the time in email or on the phones, calling from sales to service. I need this, or an email that's sent, which is see below, which is basically just another version of a cold transfer, or questioning what's going on here with the client still on the email, or when can I expect this, or good old fashioned ASAP, or saying my customer as opposed to us or our customer, and not setting proper expectations, why we need this, when we need this, as opposed to just kind of throwing it out there, expecting everyone to drop everything on their plates to tend to your matter. As you mentioned, in Lindsay's case, she may have 4 other high priorities on her plate that she has to get done before the end of the day. So they exist internally, and very often they help contribute to those silos. They help contribute to those teams not getting along. So here's an example that we use on the external customer side, but it's one that we can all relate to. It just really helps prove a point here. So everyone's familiar with this sign. If there's an establishment that serves food or beverage, they have to have this by law in the United States in their restrooms. But on the next slide, you see this example. This is an actual quick service restaurant that has 1, 2, 3, 4 signs in that tiny little bathroom telling their team members they have to wash their hands before they go back out.
Yeah, they have an epidemic going on there.
They do. Maybe the health department came in and said, put up these 4 signs. We really don't know what happened there.
Yeah.
But here's why negative cues are so important and why you have to be careful with them. So a first-time customer might walk in that bathroom and say, what is going on here? Should I even pick up my order? Should I just walk out? But meanwhile, the employees of that establishment walk in that restroom maybe 3, 4 times during their shift, use the facilities, hopefully wash their hands and walk back out. And what happens to the employees is when they see this multiple times a day, those signs start to kind of blend in, right? They kind of become like artwork on the walls. I don't really pay attention anymore.
Billboards as you're driving to work.
I know they're there, but I don't really see them. And again, a first-time customer walks in is like, holy cow, what's happening here? So the important lesson of looking at your negative cues is that you have to look at those negative cues through the lens of the customer, whoever that customer happens to be, right? So if you're looking at negative cues on behalf of your service department, you have to look through the lens of a sales rep or a sales team, right? So be mindful of that. Those negative cues hide. We don't see them because they're part of our day-to-day, but they do stand out to whoever is on the other side of that interaction. And so that's one message that I just want to get out to make sure that you're focused on. Who is the customer in that case? And are you looking at things through their perspective? And that's a really important place to start when you're looking at negative cues. And so if you haven't looked at internal negative cues and you want to tear down some silos and work on your internal culture, that's a great place to start.
So we've talked a lot about things that, could be wrong with the handoffs and not understanding the day in the life of your coworker and different teams and silos. How can we improve or reduce that from happening?
Well, one of the key things that we have found that organizations need, and they typically don't always have, is kind of an assumption that we make when we hire people that they got this, they know this, and they don't, is creating internal communication best practices and making sure that as part of your training and your team members are up to speed on what that is. And here's some examples, right? The first one is sometimes you can see it as a no-brainer, but it's not. Identify the best communication channel for each team. Right. Sometimes, we might be emailing a team member who's out on the road and not at a desktop and maybe just on their phone. So maybe text or Slack or whatever your communication channel would be better. But, we just kind of put everything through email because we've always done it that way. Sometimes we have to adapt and find the best communication tool for each team member. So they get
on the flip side, Dave, I'm working with a client right now that says they have to check everything. They don't, because they use it all, email, text, Teams. And so it's like they don't know, Dave sent me something, I can't remember where. And so I think sometimes streamlining internal communication on a Slack or a Teams. So, the only thing an email can be is from outside, the outside world.
Right. or client related versus something on Slack is internal. Absolutely. That's another great way to look at it.
If you enjoy what you're learning on the Customer Service Revolution podcast, you'll love our weekly newsletter, The E-Service. It's full of great customer experience tips and stories, includes special offers, webinars, and more each week. To sign up, head to tdg.click/e-service. That's tdg.click/e-service, ESERVICE. Enter your preferred email address, and you can look forward to great advice from John in your inbox every Wednesday.
Another great communication best practice that we've seen put in place: if it takes more than 3 emails, just pick up the phone. We see a lot of back and forth internally. Sometimes the customer is even on the email, sometimes they're not, right? But a lot of times just a lot of back and forth, a lot of questions and comments, and sometimes maybe those conversations get a little heated, right? If it's getting to that, just pick up the phone and have the conversation.
Well, yeah, example I could think of is you get an email saying, I need this by the end of the day. And someone can reply, end of the day is vague, right? Like, what do you mean by that? And someone can reply, can you be more specific? And then, you could easily chirp, end of day. Like, does that mean 5 or 9 p.m.? So sometimes we'll respond. I'm guilty of this. Respond with the exact same answer that you're questioning me on, because I'm like, I think it's pretty clear, which obviously it's not if someone's asking.
Right.
You think end of day. Dave, what don't you understand about end of day?
Well, here's the other thing that makes it confusing. For those of you that have kids in high school, this baffled me a little bit. A lot of their assignments are due at midnight. Now that everything is, nothing's handed in anymore, you have to get a paper and you just click send to your teacher. They have until midnight that day to get it done, as opposed to having to hand it in class. So yeah, end of the day can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The next one is explain the why, especially internally. That can be so powerful and give that sense of purpose. Why are we doing this? Why do we need this? This is one of our best clients and they're going through, they had a bad experience, so we're doing everything we can, whatever that is. But a lot of times the why goes a long way in helping to motivate that person, as opposed to just do this. And then be present and focus on who is communicating with you. Don't be multitasking during that communication. Don't be trying to get down your checklist of things to do. Focus on that conversation that you're having with that team member and pick up all the information that you need to get out of that conversation. So those are a couple of examples of what we commonly see. Here's a great example from our friends at Alpenhaus, keeping it in upstate New York along with Unishippers. Alpenhaus is also in the Albany area. They're a retailer. They sell everything you could possibly need for outdoor adventures, from skis to camping gear to RVs, everything, boats. And so they created their internal communication tool, and they are these non-negotiable standards that they now follow to make sure that they are communicating effectively, right? So some of them are maybe no-brainers or considered common sense, but we have to remember not everyone knows these things. And again, organizations make assumptions that everyone gets it, and they don't. So just to go over a couple of the ones that they came up with that they now have in place that everyone follows across the organization. Always be detailed and thorough is the first one. Be specific and assign an owner. Right. I love that. Make sure that someone, as opposed to sending an email to 5 people and assuming someone's going to pick it up and run with it, make sure that you assign someone. And then along those same lines, if you're assigned it, own it and have the accountability to follow up on the date and the time. The last one on the left, never assume the person you are communicating with knows what you are referring to. That's a little bit of what you just talked about, John. The top one on the right, I hear happens so often in organizations. Help yourself to the information that is readily available. And what that means is a lot of time companies have an FAQ or some sort of resource available, but the team member just isn't familiar with it, doesn't know it exists, hasn't been trained how to use it. So it's easier just to pick up the phone and call service, right? But then again, this tool exists that is designed to allow you to self-help and find it. And so make sure if you have those in place, there's awareness around that and people are trained on how to use them.
I love this where you spoke on never assume the person you're communicating with knows what you're referring to. We call that curse of knowledge. And we absolutely are guilty of it externally when we're talking to a customer who doesn't know our acronyms, who doesn't know our, terminology. But, I mean, we're the experts, and we will say, we'll come in and do a CEC, and then we'll look at, your service defects, and we'll do an ESAT test for your employees. And that's,
Right.
that you might as well be speaking a different language. But that also could happen internally, right? Us as consultants could be, asking employees or other departments for certain things that they don't know our, internal language. So I really like, a lot of that. Tell us about email communication best practices.
So along the same lines, some organizations take it a step further and create email specific communication best practices, because email can be such a problem in so many ways. So here are just a couple of basics that we see very often. Don't communicate in all caps. Don't treat email as text, right? Email is still considered a more formal communication tool as opposed to text, and sending out a quick, 5 or 6 word text versus be a little more formal. Have a greeting and ask how they're doing, whatever that looks like in your world.
Yeah.
Number 3, I love, don't deliver bad news via email. It's really just kicking the can down the road. It's just kind of hiding behind that email. Plus,
Dave, would you suggest that we change this from email to digital? Because I assume this would apply towards Slack and or Teams internally. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. Slack and Teams kind of present their own new set of challenges.
Yeah.
And that's one of them, right? So still pick up the phone and have that bad news conversation if you have to follow up with.
Like you said, it's Monday morning, and I say, Lindsay, where's the report I asked you for on Friday, right? Versus, Lindsay, I hope you had a good weekend. Just trying to find out a ETA on that sales report, right? I mean, I think this would apply towards any digital communication.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And then the next one on email communication best practices, only CC when necessary. We all know those people that CC everybody just to kind of show how hard they're working and what they have their hands in, but only include someone when they actually have to be on it. And then the subject is not the email, right? So again, to John's point, if you're using email, it's a little bit more formal. So you have to have that salutation and go a little deeper than just having those, 2 or 3 word exchanges. And so our friends at Bush Funeral Homes in the Cleveland, Ohio area created their own version of email never and always that they use. So these are specific to emails. You see on the top right, they have the 4 reasons to email internally: to officially communicate a question or decision, to confirm or schedule appointments, to document important conversations, or to send a Bush or a team announcement, so an organization announcement. Those are the reasons to use email internally, because they have other platforms as well, like Slack, or I think in their case, Teams. So this is where they want the emails, the more formal communication to exist, in those 4 categories. And then just a couple of their nevers and the corresponding always. And we talked about some of these already. Never take more than 3 emails to discuss. Pick up the phone if you need to. Never reply all to save time. Reply all only if all need the details. And then never ignore or put off reply. I'm going a little further down there. Respond promptly, which I think is an important one. A lot of times, I've worked with organizations where email has kind of lost some priority, right? I look at my emails at the end of the day, but you never know what might be in there. So it's a good practice to make sure, to your point, John, that you're kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of all your communication tools and making sure that your team members are reaching you where they need to reach you. The last one that I'll touch on, because I think it's an important one, especially for creating a world-class internal culture, they have never send unnecessary emails after hours, which in their case is between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., or when someone is on vacation. Consider work-life balance, right? So, yeah, because even if I say I'm going to send this at 9 o'clock tonight because I don't want to forget,
right?
The person on the receiving end might see that as urgent and stop what they're doing and find an answer. So it's just a great practice.
Love it. Yeah, and so this is kind of going back to the day in the life of our each other, our team member, our department, your customers, whoever is dependent on the work that you do. And if you're not serving the customer, you better be serving someone that is. And so I like to tell a story. When I was in college, I worked in the middle of the night, literally from 3:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. loading trucks for UPS. And it was a hard job. It was a good job. But then I'd go, the drivers would come in around 8:30 and take the trucks that I loaded and delivered to businesses and homes. And the one thing that UPS failed to teach me was who my customer was. And if you would have asked me back then in the late 80s who my customer was, I would have said the box. I mean, what do you mean who my customer is? But a lot of times the driver would come in the next day and he'd be upset with me because I misloaded. Every package had an address, and every address had a specific logistical location that went in based on where he was going to be in the morning, afternoon, all those things. And sometimes I got sloppy. Sometimes when the truck got so packed and I didn't feel like taking all the packages out to get it in the exact right spot, I'd frisbee the envelope. And to me, the drivers they were billionaires to me. They made a lot of money, compared to where I was at that time. So I didn't have any empathy or compassion until I graduated from college and I went driving. And now I'm driving and I'm hustling. I got a wife at home and I got a 6-month baby at home. And I just want to get home, and I'm skipping my lunches. I'm skipping my breaks. And I'm rushing, and I just want to get home. I don't want to work late. I'm young, and I remember, one time specifically that I only had 2 packages left. It's 4:15. I called my wife from a payphone and said, "Make reservations, make dinner. I'll be home by 5:15." And then I went and grabbed the next package, and it was misloaded by my preloader. He had put it in the wrong section of the truck, and for a place I was at this morning. And as a result of that misload, I had to drive across town in rush hour to deliver that one package that now I'm not going to get home until 6:45, 7 p.m. But it wasn't until that moment I realized that UPS failed to teach me, when I was a preloader, the day in the life of a driver who is really my customer, and the ripple effect it had on the driver's customers who always get their packages by 10:30. But now they might have told the customer, "Oh, we'll have it Tuesday at, no later than 10:30, come in." And that customer may drive across town and expect that package, expect the hockey stick to be at that sporting goods store. But the driver didn't deliver it because it was misloaded until, after 6 p.m. when the sporting goods store is closed. So we really got to do a great job of understanding our invisible service providers. And that's really what the people that don't come in contact with customers still have customers. So who are your invisible service providers, and how can we teach them the day in the life of the people they're supporting?
Yeah, and that's an exercise you can do right now. Right? Identify who those invisible service providers are. They're usually more internally focused than externally focused, and make sure they're aware of the impact that they have. Now, the last thing on our list today to chat about when it comes to tearing down silos are those all-important internal handoffs, and making sure that we have standards in place. That we talked about that before, making sure that we have plotted out and we have a process in place. We know who owns what. We know what the standards are. Let's use that sales and service example because that's so prevalent out there in the world today. But we know that when sales is making a handoff, they're still going to have this conversation. And this conversation, they're going to introduce with a warm handoff to service, and service is going to jump in and do this and this, and making sure that that's spelled out and making sure everyone understands who owns what they need to do, what their expectations are, and what their standards are to follow. So our friends at Alpenhaus back in upstate New York created some wonderful training tools to show their team members what they could and should do in that instance. So we have a quick snippet of one of those videos that we'll share now.
Good morning. It's a great day at Alpenhaus. How can I help you?
Hi, I'd like to talk to somebody about a boat I saw at the boat show. Yeah, I talked to this nice man named Mark, and I was wondering if he was around. I don't have a lot of time though. I have to go pick up my kids from practice, and my husband is homesick, and you know how that can be. It's like having another kid in the house.
I'd be glad to transfer you to Mark. May I please put you on hold?
Sure, that would be fine, but I don't have a lot of time.
I completely understand. Let me reach out to Mark right now.
So I love this example, right? So the manager, the training manager, then asks these questions, right? So what did you pick up there? What would you tell Mark that you heard during this conversation, right? And then what are the important pieces that Mark should know before he has this conversation? Because if you don't tell Mark that, what's going to happen? Mark's going to go into his typical spiel. He may have a 20-minute intro when someone calls back about a boat, but you have to share that information. And so it's training our team members to really be listening to make that warm transfer in this particular handoff. So in this case, we need to tell Mark that she's very interested. She has a family, so kids are involved. So, be thinking about kids' activities that they'll be doing on this boat once they buy, because that's going to help the sales process. But again, she's strapped for time, super busy, husband sick, kids have to be places, not a lot of time, but she's very, very interested. Now, are you really, one of the things what I like to say about internal handoffs and warm transfers, yes, they're about the customer experience and making that a better customer experience so the customer does not have to repeat themselves. But to me, what's really more important about a good internal handoff or a warm transfer is that you are setting up your teammate for success. You are giving them all the information that you have so they can then take that ball and run with it and close that sale or provide that service, whatever it is they need to do. And a lot of times our team members aren't thinking that way. They're just thinking, I got to get this call off my plate and over to Mark so he can do his thing and I'm out of it. And so I think that's such a great way to look at it. How can we set our team members up for success? And how can we have that mentality in place? So again, another exercise that you could do is as early as today after this webinar is start to identify where do we have internal handoffs and where do we sometimes drop the ball when those take place, and where can we create some standards so that every team member knows what they should be doing, who owns what, and what they need to be transferring, what information needs to go with that customer to the next person.
Love it. Love it. So that will wrap up this chapter, Changing the World by Creating an Employee Experience Revolution. And that definition, cannot say it enough. Great leaders, great companies help people live extraordinary lives. Their leaders inspire employees to build lives of meaning and purpose. And these are the chapters. And next webinar will be on building and developing great leaders. If you haven't gotten your book, we're going to show you how as you're putting in questions. On June 15th, it came out and it hit #1 new release. And that makes Mr. Murray a best-selling author. And we're really excited. We also now are offering our clients for helping us hit #1, 50% off a case. Every case that you order. So if you want all your leaders, which you should be having all your leaders read this book and doing book reports and listening to these webinars, as well as you're probably familiar with in the past, the CX Academy. Well, now starting in September, we have the EX Executive Academy, which on the left is all the curriculum that you'll be learning. And it's filling up, and it's you come to Cleveland, beautiful Cleveland, the customer service capital of the world, and you come to Cleveland for 3 days every quarter for a year. So, and you learn all these great things, and just is good, if not better, than learning from the instructors, Dave and I, is the other HR leaders and just leaders in this class from different world-class brands that are creating an employee experience revolution. Let's wrap up this episode with my mantra, living an extraordinary life so countless others do. I recently saw one of my favorite TED Talks of all time. Scott Galloway's TED Talk titled How the U.S. is Destroying Young People's Future is one of my all-time favorite and well worth watching. It will be in the show notes, a link to it. It's a scorching talk, marketing professor and podcaster Scott Galloway dissects the data showing that by many measures, young people in the U.S. are worse off financially than ever before. He unpacks the root causes and effects of this great intergenerational theft, asking why we, older generations, let it continue, and showing how we can make it end. Check it out. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of the Customer Service Revolution podcast.